In 1347, a ship pulled into the harbor of Messina, Sicily, and almost everyone on board was already dead. The few sailors still breathing were covered in black swellings, and within days, the disease inside that ship would start killing people across the entire continent. Historians now believe the disease had already been sweeping through Asia for over a decade, carried along trade routes that connected empires most people had never heard of before it ever reached a European port. Doctors had no idea what was happening. They didn't know germs existed. They didn't know rats or fleas had anything to do with it. And somehow, within a few brutal centuries, humans figured out how to survive it anyway. The numbers are almost impossible to process. Between 1347 and 1352, the Black Death is estimated to have killed somewhere between 75 and 200 million people across Europe, Asia, and North Africa. In parts of Europe, entire villages emptied out within weeks. In cities like Florence and London, mass graves were dug faster than they could be filled, and daily death tolls climbed into the hundreds within a single city block. Historians estimate the disease wiped out somewhere close to half of Europe's total population in just a handful of years. Not from a war, not from famine, at least not directly. From a disease nobody understood, spreading faster than anyone could explain, along trade routes nobody suspected. The disease itself came in three brutal forms: bubonic, spread mainly through flea bites and marked by swollen lymph nodes; pneumonic, which spread through the air between people and killed almost everyone it touched within days; and septicemic, the rarest and most lethal, poisoning the bloodstream before symptoms even had time to fully develop. Contemporary accounts describe entire households dying within the same week, sometimes the same day, with no clear pattern anyone at the time could explain. Even recovering from one form offered no guarantee against the others, which is part of why survival felt so random to the people living through it. So what did people think was causing it? The leading medical theory at the time was called miasma, the idea that disease spread through bad-smelling air rising from rotting matter, swamps, and unburied corpses. Doctors told people to carry sweet-smelling herbs and flowers to purify the air around them. Some physicians even recommended standing near latrines, on the theory that one bad smell could cancel out another. Others avoided bathing entirely, convinced that open pores let poisoned air sink deeper into the body. Others blamed the alignment of the planets. Some blamed sin, convinced the plague was divine punishment for humanity's wickedness. Nobody, anywhere, suspected a flea. Fear this deep also turned people against each other. Across parts of Europe, Jewish communities were falsely blamed for poisoning wells and causing the plague, leading to horrific violence and expulsions in city after city, even though Jewish communities were dying from the same disease at similar rates. It's one of the darkest chapters of the entire crisis, and a reminder that panic without understanding doesn't just fail to solve a problem, it creates new ones. Other groups responded by turning the punishment inward. The flagellants marched from town to town, whipping themselves in public as an act of penance, convinced that if enough people suffered visibly, God would lift the plague. It didn't work, of course, but it shows just how desperate people were for any explanation that gave them a sense of control. Then there's the image most people associate with this era: the plague doctor, dressed in a long black coat and a mask shaped like a bird's beak. That beak wasn't decoration. It was usually packed with dried flowers, herbs, vinegar-soaked sponges, and spices, based entirely on the miasma theory. These doctors were often paid by the town itself, since few physicians were willing to risk direct contact with plague victims for private clients. The doctor believed he was filtering out the poisonous air before it could reach his lungs. What he almost certainly didn't realize is that the mask and heavy coat may have also created a small physical barrier between his skin and infected fleas. It wasn't germ theory. It wasn't even close. It was an accident that occasionally quietly helped. But one idea actually worked, and it came from a city that didn't understand the disease at all. In 1377, the city of Ragusa, modern-day Dubrovnik, ordered that ships and travelers arriving from plague-affected areas had to wait offshore for 30 days before entering the city. Venice later extended that to 40 days and gave us the word we still use today, quarantine, from the Italian quaranta giorni, 40 days. The word itself has stuck around for 7 centuries, still used today for outbreaks the original Ragusans could never have imagined. Nobody there knew about bacteria. They knew from observation that sickness seemed to travel with people, and that keeping new arrivals separated for a while seemed to help. Crude, coincidental, but functional. Wealthier families found their own version of the same idea. In Florence, the writer Giovanni Boccaccio described a group of nobles who fled the city entirely, isolating themselves in a countryside villa to wait the plague out. The exact instinct that would later be called social distancing, centuries before anyone had that phrase. It worked for the people who could afford it. It also meant survival in many places, quietly depended on money. Cities also burned clothing and possessions belonging to the dead without knowing exactly why it helped, just that towns doing it seemed to suffer less. Some communities began separating the sick from the healthy inside their own homes. None of these practices came from a laboratory. They came from pattern recognition. Watch closely enough, and even without a theory, you can find the moves that reduce the count. And then there's the harder question: who actually survived and why? Some researchers have proposed that certain genetic mutations, still studied today, may have offered partial resistance to the plague bacterium in some populations. One frequently cited candidate is a mutation called CCR5 delta 32, though its exact role in plague survival is still debated among researchers. What's much clearer is that survival often came down to circumstance. How close you lived to major trade routes, how crowded your household was, how quickly your community reacted to the first signs of illness, and bluntly, a considerable amount of luck. The plague didn't just kill people, it rewired the economy that came after it. With so much of the labor force gone, surviving peasants suddenly had leverage they'd never had before. Landowners, desperate for workers, had to raise wages and loosen the rigid feudal restrictions that had trapped generations before them. In a strange, brutal way, the disease that devastated Europe also cracked open a system that had kept most people powerless for centuries. So how did humans survive one of the deadliest events in recorded history with zero understanding of germs, viruses, or bacteria? Not with medicine, with observation. They watched what worked, even without knowing why, and repeated it. Distance, isolation, burning what couldn't be cleaned, waiting out the unknown in stretches of time long enough to matter. They didn't need the right theory. They just needed to notice the right pattern and follow it seriously enough to survive. The Black Death reshaped everything from labor to religion to how cities are designed to this day. If this kind of history fascinates you, let me know what era you want covered next. And if you learned something new, hit like and subscribe. Because next time we're covering a disaster almost nobody talks about anymore. See you in the next one.